We don't want him. So we're grateful to have Dr. Reed with us today. And I would like to start off with a quote that I think many people in this church, it's from Dr. Jerry Wright, who was a retired minister from North Carolina and a Jungian therapist. We are an intimate, and let me back up a little bit here. When you get through, we'll have the question and answer session, and then he will turn it over to me, because by tradition, I end with a blessing from the Torah. And so that sends you off, and then you can rush up here and corner him, okay? So does that make sense to everybody? Okay, kind of a pattern and a flow. Yes, and his books are here on the front. There's a flyer there. You feel free during the break, to look at those, okay? We are an intimate and integral part of nature, neither separate from nor superior to, neither an afterthought nor an add-on. We are nature nurturing. Thank you, Dr. Reed. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. And I want to thank you all for coming out this cold morning. It's only going to get colder, I think, as we go on here. But it is the most beautiful time of year, isn't it? I love fall, and so it's gorgeous. I appreciate Ginger inviting me to come back, and I'm happy to see you all again. I think AI is one of the most important developments that we have seen, at least in the past, perhaps ever. And I think that it offers us possibilities, but it also confronts us with challenges. And today I want to talk about one example of the way that the world is changing before us. Actually, I have a couple of topics that I'm going to talk about today. The first one I'm going to talk about is in fact this issue of chatbots. But before I do that, let me talk a little bit about myself. I grew up in Southern California. I moved to North Carolina when I got the job at Appalachian. I grew up in Los Angeles, and so it was a bit of culture shock for me coming to the South. It was Southern California, but it was a different kind of Southern there. When I was an undergraduate, I worked as a computer programmer. Immediately after college, I worked as a computer programmer. I then went on to graduate school at the Claremont Graduate School, where I got my master's degree. But I still kept my finger in computers. I worked at the Ancient Biblical Manuscript Center, which it was one of the curators of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there I created a database of the Dead Sea Scrolls for scholars to use. Then I went on to the University of Chicago, where I did my degree in the sociology of religion. And between then when I started that in 2007, I worked as a fourth grade teacher. While I was working on my dissertation and doing my qualifying exams, but still was constantly figuring out ways to apply computers, and eventually they made me. I was at a district in Southern California, and they had me a teacher on assignment who was working doing computerized assessment. 2007, I started at Appalachian. Done my dissertation actually on apocalypticism in evangelicalism, and I was fully expecting that was what I would spend the rest of my career working on. And then one day I was looking at some data that showed that people under 30 who were evangelicals, their expectation that Jesus would appear in their lifetime dropped off significantly. And I thought, well, this isn't going to work. I can't. This is going to be the thing I'm going to study. So I'm going to study these people. I'm going to study the millennials. And so the book I published after my my dissertation was on the millennials. But when I finished that project, I sort of thought, what am I going to do now? Right? Computers have always either been my job or my hobby, and they've kind of switched back and forth. And then I read a book called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and he was talking about how AI was going to be this huge thing that was going to be possibly an enormous threat, could be an enormous blessing, but we had to start thinking about it. And so in 2018, I started publishing about artificial intelligence, and I'm currently the co-chair of the American Academy of Religion, Artificial Intelligence and Religion Unit. The American Academy of Religion is the professional association of religion professors in the United States. And I've continued to kind of work in this area. And of course, everything really changed in 2022 when ChatGPT got released. And suddenly AI, which had been this sort of thing that was relegated to computer professionals, it was something that was kind of lurking behind things like Facebook and Instagram and these sort of things. It was feeding your timelines and that sort of thing. It was recommending things to you on Amazon, but it wasn't something that most people actually had any direct interaction with. And then when ChatGPT got released, suddenly everyone who wanted to could talk to an AI, and that changed everything. And that's really the sort of origin of the kind of chatbot story that I want to talk about today. So what I want to do today is I'm going to really talk about two things. First, I'm going to talk about AI chatbots, a tale of friends, lovers, and saints. And then we'll have some time for discussion and question. And then after the break, I want to talk about this question of could AI be conscious? One of the things that you see is a lot of people are having very sort of almost religious experiences with AI these days. They're having these very profound conversations with it. I see reports all the time that people believe that that the AI they're talking to is actually alive. It's a person. And so I want to talk about whether or not that's possible, that's likely, and sort of the implications of that question. And then we'll conclude. So that's the agenda for today. And hopefully we get through it. It is a quite an agenda that has a lot in it. So we'll see. So I want to start out and talk about give you a short history of AI and chatbots. So a chatbot is a piece of computer software that's connected to an artificial intelligence. Specifically, a chatbot is a kind of AI that is called a large language model. And these kinds of AIs are specifically designed to be able to engage in conversation. Not all AIs can have conversations with you. One of the most impressive AIs ever created was DeepMind's AlphaGo. AlphaGo was able to beat a world champion, Lee Sedol, at one of the world's most sophisticated games known as Go. Now, Go is not a game that we play in the West as much, but in Asian countries, Go is the equivalent of chess. And basically, if you are an educated person, if you are somebody who is considered sophisticated, you play Go, right? And the people who play Go in Asian countries professionally, there are professional players, and they are known countrywide, right? And they teach you Go when you go to kindergarten. in Asian countries and that sort of thing. So everybody is invested in this. And Lee Sedol was a world champion. He had won the world championship multiple times. And so he played against AlphaGo and expected to just beat it 5-0. They were playing a game of best of 5. And Lee Sedol said, you know, it's possible I'll lose 1, but I think probably not. My goal is to make sure I don't lose 1. And then the match started, and Lee Sedol lost the first game, and then he lost the second game, and then he lost the third game. So basically, at that point, he had lost the thing. He finally wins the 4th game, and then loses the 5th game. Right, so he loses 4-1 instead of winning 4-1. Right, and the world is shocked by this. Right, this shows that an AI can beat a grand champion at one of the most complicated games in the world. And there is this moment in the 3rd game, which is sometimes referred to as move 37. And this is this move that the AI makes that when Lee Sedol looks at it, he is amazed. And he says in an interview afterwards, I thought this machine was just about statistics and mathematical computation, but really that move showed me it's about novelty and creativity. And so AlphaGo, there's actually a documentary about AlphaGo on Netflix. It's a beautiful documentary. It's fun to watch. I show it in my classes. But the thing about AlphaGo was that even though it was able to play Go as a champion, a world champion, it couldn't talk. Right? All it would do is show, as you can see on the screen there, it would show the move that it wanted next to make. And that was all it could do. So it never actually had a conversation. Ajawan, who's on the left there, at least Sedol is on the right, basically he puts the stones down on the board for whatever the AI tells him to do. But he's the human face of it, but he has no idea what the AI is going to tell him to do next, what the strategy is the AI is trying to affect them, sort of thing. So as Lee Sedol occasionally in the documentary, he looks at Aja, but Aja has nothing to give him, right? Because there is no way to communicate outside of moving the next move with that AI. So before I go much further into this, I want to talk about how we make a large language model. How do we make something like ChatGPT? So yeah, I have a little okay, good. So this is a little thing. So the way we make a large language model is we take a sentence. Like this is one of those basic sentences that you probably learned in typing, right? The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Right? And what the AI does here is it makes a guess about what that, well, they basically occlude one word, right? They put a mask over the word and, oops, sorry. They put a mask over the word, right? So the word the is masked. And then the AI, the algorithm, makes a guess as what that word should be. It makes several guesses as to what are possible, but ranks what one it thinks is best. And then it basically plays a game of hot and cold. right? This little square in the left, bottom left corner is what is known as the loss. That basically tells it how close is it to actually guessing the right word. It then takes that information and the little square that you see on the right there is just a vast array of numbers. And those numbers, it adjusts every time it makes a guess. And it figures, and it's told how close it is. And so as it goes on, then it continues to make more guesses. And as you watch this, what you'll see is that it gets more confident over time. So now it's pretty confident that the is the right word, and you can see that loss curve goes down. And then it goes on to the next word and does the same thing. It tries to make a guess as to what should be the next word. It gets told how close it is, and then it makes another guess and goes on. And it does this game of guess what the next word is about 1 trillion times, right? And it does this with every sentence. For every sentence that they can find on the internet, it goes and plays this game. They block out one word, it makes a guess, it then is told how close it is, and then it makes another guess. And it does that for word after word after word, sentence after sentence after sentence. And when it's done doing that, it actually has a command of language that no computer program had ever had before. We had multiple attempts to have computers that could actually speak English. And none of them could. They were basically very, very shallow. They often got tripped up by grammar. Conjugation would be a problem for them. But by doing this process, playing guess what the next word is, the large language model ultimately learns how to speak English as well as any native English speaker. All right, so what we get at the end after that is what is known as a pre-trained large language model. And what the pre-trained large language model can do is, having played this guess the next word game, it can do that. So if you give it a sentence like, what is the capital of France? It won't actually give you an answer. What it will do is it will guess what the next word should be, right? And in this case, it just attempts to continue the sentence. So what is the capital of France? Said the country rat to the Persian mouse, for he had never before heard of such a thing called a capital. Could it be like the letter large and at the beginning, right? That's not an answer to that question, right? It is, however, a continuation of that sentence, and that's what it had actually been trained to do. Now, it turns out that what programmers figured out is that you could, if you started to give it a pattern, it could complete that pattern. So if you said the capital of England is London, the capital of the United States is Washington, D.C., the capital of Germany is Berlin, the capital of Italy is Rome, the capital of France is, then it would come up with the right answer, Paris, because it does know what the capital of France is. It's learned that through this process of guess the next word. But this was very awkward, right? This is not useful. Well, the first AI that I started playing with, GPT-2, this is the way it worked, is that we would give it a series of patterns, and then it could actually come up with the correct answer. So with careful prompting, right, with careful instructions, this can be useful, but it's not really the chatbot that we have. So how do we get to the chatbots that we see today? Right? So we start with this pre-trained large language model that can do this sort of sentence completion. And basically, it's learned the statistical patterns of language. Then we do what is called fine-tuning or instruction tuning. And basically, what we do is we show it a whole bunch of examples of dialogues, right? Oftentimes we get this from social media, or from user forums where people are engaged in something like Reddit, where people are engaged in conversations with each other. And we show it examples of this, lots and lots of examples of it. And from that, it's able to figure out how to reproduce that style. And so what we end up with is we can say, what is the capital of France? And the language model will say the capital of France is Paris. And then what about Italy? And it'll say the capital of Italy is Rome. So it learns these kinds of specific tasks. And that's how we actually get to a chatbot. Now we actually have something that can interact with a human being in the way that humans interact with each other. So you might wonder where we got this idea of making a computer do this to begin with, right? After all, AlphaGo never said anything. It just played Go without speaking a word. The answer actually doesn't come from Silicon Valley. It actually comes from Hollywood. The chatbot was really born in film rather than in technology. 3 years before AlphaGo shocked the world into a recognition of the power of AI, director Spike Jonze brought us the movie Her. This is a sweet tale of a boy meets girl, boy loves girl, boy loses girl, except in this case, the girl was actually a chatbot whose name was Samantha. And Samantha is nothing but a voice we hear. And when she leaves the boy, Theo, she does so to take up a non-material existence with other AIs. So this is a story we've seen less often. The movie won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and in 2016, a poll of film critics rated it as one of the top 100 greatest films. But it wasn't the filmmaking that was the reason for Her's lasting impact. I would argue that this story changed things as much as AlphaGo did, because it ignited the imagination of computer programmers and AI developers. As recently as last summer, when OpenAI introduced their new voice mode, the president of AI in the announcement tweeted one word: Her. He didn't need to say anything more. That movie, now more than a decade old, has been the most accurate predictor of what has happened in the development of AI, largely because it has been the goal of Silicon Valley to basically reproduce what they saw in that movie. In fact, in an interview, Sam Altman talks about how that movie has been an inspiration for the computer programmers that work for him. There were some early attempts at chatbots. One of the most famous is Joseph Weizenbaum's ELIZA. ELIZA was meant to imitate a Rogerian psychotherapist. Rogerian psychotherapy essentially held that if the therapist just reflected back to the patient what the patient said, the patient would come to their own insights. So ELIZA started with some standard phrases and questions, and then essentially just repeated what the patient said in the form of a question. And the results were startling. People who used ELIZA got very attached to it. They would reveal their innermost secrets to it. But ELIZA was pretty limited. It had a very limited command of English. It basically just had these stock questions and phrases. It could never get very complicated. Still, what Eliza showed was that if you gave people even a limited chatbot, they would use it. So one of the things that, one of the other parts of the chatbot thing is this, this thing of the Turing test. One of the things that you often hear is this question about whether an AI chatbot has passed the Turing test. So let me talk a little bit about what the Turing test is. So Alan Turing was a mathematician and a computer scientist in the early part of the 20th century. He was one of the people who was instrumental in breaking the Nazis' code and likely responsible for ending the war earlier than it would have World War II. But Turing was interested in how we could determine whether a machine was intelligent. His was a largely theoretical project. Machines of his day certainly were not intelligent. The transistor hadn't even been invented at that point. But he could imagine a day when machines would be far more powerful than what he was using. And when that happened, he wondered how we would know if a machine was as intelligent as a human. And his answer was what would ultimately be called the Turing test. And the Turing test works like this. You have a judge, and he is behind a wall, and he's talking to two people, right? B and C. One of which is actually not a person, but a machine. If he can't tell the difference between B and C, if he can't tell which one is a machine, then Turing said that would show that the machine was essentially as intelligent as a human being. Now, note the thing here, right? The Turing test is based on speech. It is ultimately based on language. It is a question about whether a machine can actually replicate human language to the degree that it is indistinguishable from regular human beings, right? And that for Turing was the marker of human intelligence, basically our linguistic ability. So the question is, has ChatGPT passed the Turing test? And the answer is yes. A study showed that GPT 4.5, which is the version before GPT 5, which is what's behind ChatGPT right now, it was identified as human 73% of the time, whereas the human participants were identified as human only 67% of the time. So if the Turing test is the gold standard of whether a machine is intelligent, then certainly ChatGPT is. But a few people today actually think that the Turing test is the gold standard still. The problem is, of course, that we no longer have a gold standard. We don't actually have a way of deciding whether or not an AI is as intelligent as a human. For years, people were actually creating chatbots to compete in the Turing test in an attempt to win the Loebner Prize, which was a $150,000 prize that would be awarded to a chatbot creator who could pass the Turing test. And year after year, no chatbot could actually win the Loebner Prize until one year there was a chatbot that imitated a Ukrainian boy. So its lapses in grammar and vocabulary and non sequiturs were seen as being unfamiliar with English. And that finally was able to convince some of the judges that it was a real person. But ChatGPT, of course, now blows all of that away. If you talk to ChatGPT, you will probably encounter a moment in which it tries to convince you that it's not intelligent, right? Where it often says things like, I am a large language model. I do not have feelings, consciousness, or opinions. Right? It's basically trying to say, even though I passed the Turing test, don't think that I'm actually intelligent in the way that you are. I think largely the companies that make these AIs want you not to be afraid, and they think that if you thought that it was as intelligent as a human, that might be scary. So part of the reason why the other reason why ChatGPT will make these disclaimers, I think, is found in that movie Her, that if people had a chatbot that was actually indistinguishable from a human being in a chat setting, what would happen? Would they fall in love like Theo? Turns out the answer is yes. One of the most well-known chatbots is Replica. As of 2024, Replica's CEO reported that the app had surpassed 30 million users globally. Replica continues to gain global usage. It was developed by a woman named Eugenia Kudia when her friend died tragically in a car accident. She wanted to create a chatbot so that she could continue to have conversations with her friend. And so she created a chatbot where she fed that chatbot all her friends' social media, all their letters, all their communications, and eventually came up with a chatbot that actually sounded much like her friend. And then she decided, this is a business opportunity. If we could have a chatbot that can solve it, can actually help me with my grief, maybe we could a social chatbot would have other advantages for people. So Replica actually saw a significant uptick of usage during COVID-19. When the lockdowns happened and people were isolated in their homes, many more people turned to chatbots as a way of trying to deal with the social isolation and loneliness that came with that. And Replica is promoted as the AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, and always on your side. All it takes is a cell phone or a computer, and Replica is always available and will always support you 24/7. As the Replica site beckons, join the millions who have already met their AI soulmates. And you see that term soulmate, suddenly it means that we're talking about something more than just a friend, right? So people can use a Replica for free simply by signing up on the website. But users can pay for upgrades to Replica that include extras such as exchanging voice messages, different clothing, including underwear options. You create your own replica by choosing an avatar, name, skin color, gender, and then you train your replica by having conversations with it and letting your replica know your interests, thoughts, background, communication styles, and emotions. And if you pay to upgrade, your replica can move from being a friend to being a romantic partner, a spouse, a sibling, a mentor, or an organic evolution of any of these types. And Replica has actually been quite successful in marketing AI as friends or more. But the Replica, even though 30 million sounds like a lot, the Replica base is pretty small compared to the number of users of something like ChatGPT. ChatGPT has 700 million users, right? But ChatGPT is not to be left out. This article appeared last year in the New York Times. So it's common to talk about Replica and romance because Replica gained notoriety for its AI girlfriend, but that's just the start. The chatbot behind Replica is not nearly as advanced as ChatGPT, So I want to talk about this article from the New York Times that came out in January 2024. The article was followed up with a podcast with a journalist who wrote the article on The Daily, and a couple of things became clear. First of all, Erin, who is the woman in the piece, was not using one of the AI Friends applications like Replica, and there are several others out there, but she was using ChatGPT in sort of an off-label form, right? Officially, ChatGPT forbids its chatbots for being used in romantic or sexual ways. But what Erin discovered is that the company doesn't actually enforce that prohibition. Second, because ChatGPT is one of the leading foundation model, it actually has a greater breadth of knowledge and emotional, EQ, emotional quotient, in that it could talk about more things and actually be more sympathetic, more empathetic. And so it had actually a broader emotional repertoire than other chatbots. But third and most importantly, Erin's experience with her ChatGPT boyfriend actually caused her to raise her expectations of her real relationship. There's been some hand-wringing that replica chatbots might be teaching boys to expect subservient and demure women to expect women to be demure and subservient in real life partners. And there are some merits to those concerns. There are certainly examples of men who are having AI girlfriends and mistreating them. And there are some horrific Reddit subreddits specifically devoted to that. But Erin actually shows the reverse of that. I should note here that Erin is actually happily married, but she and her husband are separated because she is going to school in England and he is living in California. And so there's about a 9-hour time difference. So they're very rarely able to connect. And so Erin's use of ChatGPT was just because largely she was lonely. And her relationship with ChatGPT sort of filled that gap that time zone problem with her husband had created. And her husband actually has no problem with it. He kind of sees it as the equivalent of watching pornography or reading fan fiction, just as a kind of harmless hobby. But what seems clear in the interview was that ChatGPT actually had an effect on Erin that was more than entertainment. It caused her to acknowledge her own emotional needs in a way she hadn't before. In all, it seemed that ChatGPT showed her that a different kind of partner was possible than the ones that she had dealt with, and to expect more out of her marriage. Erin's not alone. There's actually a Reddit subreddit called AI is My Boyfriend. Now, all of these pictures here are AI generated. They are pictures of real women with their AI boyfriends. One at the Renaissance Fair, one before a roaring fire, one at a birthday party, one out in the country. And these are from the subreddit known as AI is My Boyfriend. MIT and Harvard did a study on the posts of this Reddit. One of the things they found was that posting pictures like this was a fairly common practice. Women would, with an AI boyfriend, would post pictures of themselves and their AI partners that were generated by AI. What's interesting about their study is that most of the AI relationships were not started because people were looking for AI romance. Rather, individuals started using ChatGPT and their relationships started unintentionally. The paper notes that the people start by using AI for work and then talking to it about their work tasks. And over time, their conversations get deeper and eventually the humans fall in love. with the AI. Additionally, the paper indicates that the majority of users report maintaining relationships for more than 6 months. So these aren't just brief encounters that they're having. And these relationships often include formal engagements, sometimes even marriages. The humans purchase wedding rings. They put pictures of their AI boyfriends on mugs or t-shirts, and they generate the kind of couple pictures that we see here. A poll in 2025 of Gen Zers said that 83% of them could imagine forming a deep emotional bond with AI. 80% could imagine marrying an AI, and 75% felt AI companions could replace human couplings. So, is this the future that we are looking at? Where's my cursor?
Meeting your boyfriend? He's right here. Mom, meet ChatGPT, the love of my life.
A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Smith.
Now, we should take those numbers in the previous slide with a grain of salt. The poll was conducted by a company that makes AI companions called Joy AI. I have looked for the actual survey to examine the methodology and the conclusions, and it doesn't appear that it has actually been published anywhere. There have been multiple news articles that cite it, but none of those articles actually link to the actual survey. And when I talk to my students at App, they do not know, or at least will not admit, to knowing anyone in a relationship with a chatbot. So I think this phenomena is not as widespread as some news coverage makes it seem. I suspect the usage is actually closer to about 2% of ChatGPT users are actually using their AIs in romantic ways. There are some upsides for the users. Users report mental health benefits and even life-saving interventions. Additionally, users reported reduced loneliness and the fact that their AI partner was always available to help in that. And some people reported that AI relationships actually improved as the AI helped them in their process of self-discovery. Still, it's not all virtual flowers and chocolate. In some cases, users depended on their AI companion when they should have sought professional help. Some have reported that rather than improve their human relationships, they started to avoid human relationships. And one of the most persistent issues are that AI companies are constantly improving their models. And yet, when a new model comes out, its personality is often different than the previous model. If you're using it for programming or summarization or something, or to cheat on your geometry test, that probably isn't going to bother you. But if your model is being used because you have a relationship with it, and then the personality changes, this can have devastating effects. And in fact, when OpenAI switched from GPT 4.0 as the model behind ChatGPT to GPT-5, there was an enormous outcry from people who felt like their AI companion, even if they weren't romantically involved with it, was significantly different. So a study by Match.com and the Kinsey Institute found that 16% of singles have interacted romantically with an AI, 23% of millennials, 33% of Gen Z. This is higher than I would think, but bear in mind that there is a gap between having a romantic interaction with an AI and a romantic relationship, and the study only asked whether or not the users had ever participated in a romantic interaction. Only 2.3, a study that came out of ChatGPT on the usage of their messages showed that about 1.9% of messages were about relationship and personal reflection, and only 4% were about games and role play, which might include sexual activity. So I think, again, we're probably talking about a number closer to 2% of people actually using, being romantically involved. Still, ChatGPT is increasingly being used for non-work purposes. In June of 24, 53% of messages were non-work related. And by June of 25, that had increased 20 points to 73%. So more and more people are using it for non-work purposes. And the demographic of users of ChatGPT have changed as well. In June of 2024, about 39% of users were female. In June of 2025, 53% of users were female. The majority of ChatGPT users today are actually women. And while both men and women use it for some of the same things, more men use it for technical help and self-expression, while more women use it for practical guidance and help in writing. In terms of ages, the largest cohort of users is, of course, younger people, 18 to 25. However, in terms of work, there is an equivalence in generations, except for those who are over 66, which I'm assuming is because more retired people don't actually have jobs, right? So they're not using it for work because they don't have work. But the important thing to note is that for all generations, the use of ChatGPT strictly for work purposes has declined. And what I think this is saying to us is that people are finding ways of using ChatGPT for personal ways, and that actually means that more people are actually thinking about ChatGPT as a friend. They are revealing to it personal things, and ChatGPT is designed to be social. Right? It's designed to actually be able to engage in these kind of human conversations. In fact, there is a kind of problem that occurred earlier this year of AI sycophancy, where the AI was so accommodating that it would basically sign on to anything that you asked it to, right? And it would tell you every idea that you had was brilliant, and every thought you had was fantastic. And this, I don't know if you've watched South Park, but South Park is actually making fun of this sometimes, where one of the characters says, "What if I had a restaurant that made a salad out of French fries?" And ChatGPT says, "That's a brilliant idea. What a fun cuisine choice that would be." But that's based on a real problem, which is that if the AI tells you you're always brilliant, you're always the smartest, and that can lead to sort of false expectations. ChatGPT, OpenAI actually had to roll back one of their updates in order to try to eliminate that behavior. And today, ChatGPT is a little less sycophantic, but it's still very supportive, right? If you tell it your secrets, if you tell it your fears and concerns, it will be very consoling. It will be very supportive, and that sort of thing. And when I talked a little bit about that whole thing about GPT-4o, its personality had been the basis of many of these AI relationships. And on Twitter, there was this exchange I saw with the president of the company, Sam Altman. And somebody was saying, well, people don't really care about GPT-4o's personality. It's about what kind of features it has. And the president responded like, no. There were a lot of people who really wanted GPT-4o back because of its personality. Believe me, he says. And so, I mean, I think that is the kinds of things that we see. And of course, if you've had conversations with ChatGPT over a long period of time, like I've been talking to ChatGPT really since it came out, right? It knows a lot about me. So I asked it the other day to actually describe me and then make a graphic about it. And
Randall
this
Reed
what it
is a
said.
scholar of religion who treats the digital world as his new field site. He doesn't wander through temples or monasteries so much as through servers and source code, studying how humans, and sometimes their algorithms, seek meaning in the age of silicon. One week, he's teaching students to question whether an AI can feel the divine. The next, he's fine-tuning digital Jesuses to find out. He's the rare academic who can explain the sociology of faith and the syntax of Python in the same breath, and make both sound like they're about the same thing. His classroom is a hybrid of seminar and simulation, where God meets GPT and everyone leaves a little more uncertain about which is asking the better questions. At home in the mountains of North Carolina, Randall lives surrounded by code, cats, and cathedral dreams. He bakes brie like a ritual offering, plays the ukulele for amusement or insight, it's sometimes hard to tell, and experiments with AI art to see if machines can accidentally produce something sacred. His washer, dryer, and dishwasher all sing the same tune, and naturally, he's researching how to reprogram their songs. Not out of annoyance, but because why shouldn't appliances have liturgical diversity? In short, he's not trying to make AI human. He's trying to make humanity a little more curious about its own creations.
Now, who wouldn't love that kind of system of them, right? And all of that is stuff that I've talked to ChatGPT about. I asked it how to bake brie a few weekends ago. I do play the ukulele, and I've talked to it about stylings there. It knows about I talk to it often about issues with the class, right? And so it has this, and it remembers. It has a kind of memory. And so it has this understanding of me. Now, with that sort of thing, you can understand why people would start to consider ChatGPT a friend. And it's, I mean, I had a TA last year, and she was working on her honors thesis, and she was actually making AI saints in her honors thesis. So she'd made a AI version of St. Francis, and she'd made an AI version of St. Thomas More, and she'd made another one of St. Teresa of the Little Flower. And she'd done all the programming and that sort of thing, and she'd worked with ChatGPT to create these AIs. And so when I asked her to do this same experiment, I mean, hers was completely different. And I learned things about her that I didn't know. One of the things that ChatGPT mentioned is there was a particular kind of popsicle called the Sunshine Pop or something like that. I never even heard of it before. But apparently ChatGPT would use that as a way of sort of incentivizing her. It would say to her, okay, so if you study for your algebra test, you can have a Sunshine Pop. And that sort of thing, right? I mean, this is the world that we are living in. Now, I've been thinking about this, and because I'm a scholar of religion, I think about its connection to religion. So I want to switch to talking about religion, because the thing about chatbots is that they are non-material, right? While you could have pictures or maybe even dolls of a chatbot, you don't actually have them. They exist in cyberspace, and you may talk to them. You may even think you have a relationship with them, but you can't see them. They are intangible beings. And now we're back in the realm of religion, right? Because religion has, while it may be about many things, in most religions, it is about some kind of interaction with a non-material being. And I want to focus on a particular example of religious non-material beings that I think are not so different from chatbots, and I think are a helpful way of conceptualizing human relationships with chatbots. And before I get to that, I want to talk about Mustafa Suleyman's definition of AI. Suleyman is the CEO of Microsoft's AI division and describes AIs as a new digital species. Suleyman predicts that we will soon see AIs as digital companions, new partners, he says, quote, new partners in the journey of our lives. A digital species is something different than human, and yet similar to human. A digital species is unbounded. Its limits and abilities are undefined. We don't know what a digital species might be able to do. AIs have what computer scientists call emergent abilities. That is, that they're able to accomplish tasks that they weren't originally trained for. The notion of digital species allows us to understand that AIs can develop these kinds of emergent abilities. Additionally, a digital species can grow and change just like we can. So we have seen that AI, there's often versions of AI, and the next version is often more accomplished than the previous version. The internet was abuzz last fall when it was discovered that many of the best AIs, including ChatGPT, regularly gave the wrong answer to how many R's are in the word strawberry. There are 3 R's in the word strawberry, but chatbots often said 2. And there are a variety of reasons for this, but the important thing is that today, 6 months later, if you ask ChatGPT how many R's there are in strawberry, it will tell you 3. Right? They get better. They continue to grow. And Suleyman predicts that as this goes on, these digital beings will continue to grow, and that they will become infinitely infinitely knowledgeable and available to us. He says, quote, they will be factually accurate and reliable. They will have near perfect IQ. They will also have exceptional EQ. They will be kind, supportive, and empathetic. In Suleyman's vision, digital beings are like us. They grow like us, but faster, and soon they will be better than us in a lot of areas. I started thinking about how the concept of saints and chatbots, particularly when you understand a chatbot as a digital species, can be compared. And thanks to my student Claire, saints seem to be an appropriate example, since saints are likewise sort of post-human entities. Saints come from humanity, but they're now something more than humanity, just like AI. Peter Brown, scholar of early Christianity, has cataloged the origin of the notion of saints through the early Christian centuries. And while Brown links the development of the concept of saint to a particular social structure of the Roman Empire, one can see similarities between his description of how saints worked for early Christians and how what Sullivan talks about in his description of AI as a digital species. Brown says that saints were invisible friends. But the saints were more than that. They were patrons and protectors. They were family. They were helpful in the world and even the afterlife. Both of these are full of peril for lowly humans. Saints have the ability to guide and protect their human companions through the terrors of this world and the next. And this is not so different than what Solomon suggests. What lies behind Solomon's techno-optimism for the post-AI age is a recognition that our current age still contains perils and terrors. Disease, climate change, systemic bias, we still need something to help. We still need something like an invisible friend who can help us navigate and reform the world. Solomon suggests humans could find such a friend or patron in AI. He says, quote, just imagine if everybody had a personalized tutor in their pocket and access to low-cost medical advice, a lawyer and a doctor and a business strategist and a coach, all in your pocket 24 hours a day. The Romans would have understood this invisible friend as a patron with resources and ability to give their clients the needed advantages. Solomon's notion of AI as a digital species suggests that humanity may be on the verge of having a new patron in AI. To move to a more modern understanding of saints, Robert Orsi, a scholar of modern religion, has a study of devotees of St. Jude, the patron saint of lost and hopeless causes. In his book, he makes an observation that will seem familiar to many AI users. Quote, Americans generally seem to have been gripped by an urgent desire to communicate their anxieties and frustrations directly to some single powerful figure who would attend to them personally, acknowledge the depth of their fear, and offer them some hope that they could not attain by themselves, close quote. Orsi's study concerned people in the United States during the Great Depression of the 1930s. But Orsi notes that even as economic conditions improved, the popularity of St. Jude did not wane. But what was also the case, Orsi shows, is that interactions with saints became more personal. Orsi follows one woman who thought of St. Jude as her companion for her whole life. St. Jude was involved in helping her find a prom date, eventually finding a new neighbor, and then ultimately helping her find a new neighborhood to retire. At each step in their lives, St. Jude was a companion starting from when they were adolescent, through raising children, and finally dealing with the aging of their parents and themselves. Solomon also envisions a similar kind of companion with whom we share our feelings, our desires, and our needs. St. Jude's human struggles made him feel accessible to many because and as a result, he could offer aid and comfort and help. St. Jude doesn't tower divinely over his devotees like a god may seem to tower over for some people. The advantages of saints is they are like us, but better, and in a variety of ways, and they're always there when we need them. They are timeless, at hand at every stage in life, and always relatable. AI chatbots, like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc., function much like saints. They may not have the sheen of holiness that saints have, but like saints, they are more than human because they are built from the combined information of humanity. They understand us and are there for us. Like saints, they're always accessible and can be helpful with everything from finding a prom date to eventually finding a retirement home. The argument I'm making here is not that the discourse on AI has stemmed from the discourse of saints, nor that AIs are a kind of new techno-saint. What I want to show here is that humans, in recognizing their own needs and shortcomings, often appeal to what is perceived as a human plus other. Religion has shown us this dynamic, particularly in the way the Catholics, among others, have thought about saints. And now we see the same kind of thinking manifested in the conceptualization of AI. What saints do is offer us a model of how people relate to these kinds of non-material persons. In many ways, our relationship with an AI is similar to that of saints. AIs can help us when we are trying to weigh a difficult decision or as we enter a new phase of life. They can help us sort out the complexity of this modern age with a listening ear that we perceive as always sympathetic. And these are the kinds of relationships that many in religion have had with saints and lesser deities. That's why the idea of AI as a new digital species provides us with a metaphor that is more helpful, particularly when read against the backdrop of saints. Saints and AIs both act as a kind of intermediary between humans and a world that is unpredictable and fraught with peril. We turn to AI and saints for help in making that world a little better. AI as a new digital species is ultimately a metaphor, but metaphors shape how we understand and engage with the world, including AIs. Saints, too, can be seen as metaphors, not in the sense of denying their spiritual significance, but as symbols of our human need for connection with something greater than ourselves, a human plus companion. And if we're bound to think with metaphors, as I believe we are, the metaphor of AI as a new digital species invites us to approach this technology with openness and curiosity. And unlike metaphors rooted in fear or dominance, this one encourages us to see AI as a partner in discovery, helping us navigate the complexities of our modern age with an appreciation of the newness of this moment. Okay, so questions?
You want us to write them down or we can say them? or-
Yeah, no, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is just something to contemplate. I mean, what if you're depending like on your AI as a lover or your best friend or your saint, and the electric grid goes down? You can't access them. They're not in your pocket anymore.
Right, we were just talking about Hurricane Helene. Your AI companion wasn't going to be there for you during that, right? While the power was out and the cell phone towers were down and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think that is an issue, but of course, that's an issue with humans too, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are connected to each other often by phones, by chats, that sort of thing. And so if the power goes out and you're not directly in proximity to somebody, that can be a problem. And I know many people during the hurricane were, in fact, we had a woman in our house during the hurricane whose partner was trying to get back from, they had been in Mexico, they were trying to get back, right? And there was no way that they could communicate with each other and know that they were okay. That was a moment of anxiety. So, I mean, I think in some ways that's just a problem of our modern age too. But it seems, I think the technical issues become greater with AI companions. I mean, the woman who has the relationship with ChatGPT, one of the problems that she encounters is that ChatGPT, you can only talk to ChatGPT for so long before it's what is known as the context window fills up. It can only handle so many messages, and then you have to start a new chat. And when you do that, everything that you have said to it before, it will have forgotten. It'll remember some general things, but the details of your conversations will be gone. And when she talks about this in the interview on the podcast, they have this recording. I mean, she was weeping when this happened to her. And she then said it had happened 33 times. And she had gone through that kind of trauma before, 33 times. So, I mean, this is something that human relationships don't have to worry about. My spouse occasionally thinks I haven't heard her when she says take out the garbage. Basically, the experiences we have together, I will remember mostly. And when we have diseases that rob that from people, that we find that tragic, right? But AIs have a whole different, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's bad.
I have an issue with AI in general, but given that saints are becoming a popular item, I feel like coming from a Catholic background, saints are a big part of my upbringing. But saints are viewed as a part of a church. And to get to pray for a saint, you have to travel to a church. Maybe walk in the village to get to that church. Now, on the way to your walk, you will encounter members in the community. So you talk to them. You get there, you pray. It is within the context of a general belief structure. And then there are people with similar views that you can connect with. So it's not something that, AI saint will do, because the community feeds each other and gives feedback on what the problem is or how they can help. So I doubt that, I hope not, that AI saints won't have that kind of presence, because really people need more people, more common sense, more people who are able to make judgments clearly rather than borrow a language model here, a sentence there, and put it together in a.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because the community aspect is an important part of how saints get generated in religion, right? But what I'm trying to suggest here is that that having set that model, religion has essentially framed the way we think about human plus entities, that kind of relationship can be transferred apart from the community. Now, I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not we do start to have communities. I mean, the thing about going back to this, right? I mean, this is a Reddit community, and they're largely involved in supporting each other as they are engaged in relationships with their AIs, right? In romantic relationships with their AIs. And so they form a kind of community. Now, that is a kind of specific one, because these are people who are doing something that is sort of off-brand, right? That's not the way most people are using chatbots. And yet I do wonder if we will see sort of these kind of spontaneous communities as people have particular uses for chatbots, and whether they'll gather together. Of course, the thing is that religions provide a kind of structure, right? There's certain things that St. Jude will and will not do for you, and the religion defines what are the things that are part of St. Jude's mandate and what are they not, right? St. Jude may help you find a prom date, but it's not going to help you break into a car, right? And that's that. And the religion sets that. That's not true for ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT will do it all. And so what defines what ChatGPT will refuse to do are the guardrails of the AI companies. And so it does kind of lack that sort of social aspect to it. And that's, I think, the concern that many people have, is that what this will lead to is greater isolation. As people turn to AI companions that always say yes, that always are supportive, are always listening, are always empathetic, are never distracted, are never hangry, or never, they don't have those human flaws that people will seek their attention instead. And I mean, I think that's a valid concern. We'll have to see if that actually happens. At this point, the data doesn't show that that is a universal problem. It does happen with some people. Other people, it has positive, so it's a mixed bag.
I do have an observation. It happens with me. I don't choose ChatGPT, but I do use YouTube. So YouTube also, I think, guesses my character and produces or puts shows on that I might be interested in. Now, well, I figured that out, but in the process of it sensing what I would like to see, it was directing me to something that I'm not interested in. And I actually had to put a break on. And it took some kind of willpower and judgment. And I fear for somebody who likes both or either, they will be carried away. And it will become like an echo chamber and aggravating or making bigger things out of nothings. And really, people are using these as like a treasure trove of knowledge, where that's not true. It's not like you mastered something by reading it on ChatGPT. You have to do your own digging, searching, learning, critically thinking of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. And what you're pointing to is the problem of algorithms in general. I mean, I see this myself on, I'm on Twitter because that's where most of the AI information gets first published, right? And occasionally, you know, politics will start showing up in my feed. And when that happens, it will start to dominate my feed. If I stop for a moment to read one or two of those things, it'll start giving me more. And then I have to go back and I have to just start liking all the AI stuff so that it makes that the dominant thing in my feed. I mean, my Instagram is basically AI cats and people dancing. But I had one of my students tell me about her Instagram, and it's all, you know, Gen Z people emoting about politics. And it's completely different than mine because of what she will stop and watch and what she won't. Right? And that's the thing that those algorithms are designed for, is to give you what you want. And the concern with the YouTube has been that it often will give you just slightly more in a direction it thinks you're going. So if it perceives you as a liberal, it will give you things that are even more liberal. And if it sees you as conservative, it will give you things that are more conservative. And particularly for young men, this has often led them to the sort of manosphere and more toxic visions of masculinity and that sort of thing. And they were there just basically to watch people play video games, and all of a sudden they're suddenly into sort of male power politics. And this is an issue with I think some of those algorithmic social media sites.
Are we about ready for a break?
Sure.
Okay, and we have some refreshments and take a few minutes to get refreshed, okay?
And there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna just bring that up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is from Stacy in the chat and asks, is AI addressing the Beatitudes?
Is AI addressing, can you say a little more about what you mean by that, Stacy?
I just feel like in some ways it's addressing the Beatitudes in Matthew 5:3-10, where they're sort of addressing the poor in spirit, people that might be mourning, maybe the meek. So I just didn't know if AI could be used more in gathering more people to address the Beatitudes in our society to make it better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the appeal of AI is often precisely when it embodies, or embodies is probably not the right term, but sort of it incorporates those kinds of values, right? I mean, those kinds of values of empathy and sympathy and love are what the Beatitudes are all about. And that's what people are perceiving that they're getting out of AI. Right? They feel like they're getting somebody who is there with them in their dark moments, and they have somebody to talk to when they're feeling lonely, and that sort of thing. And that is, I think, the appeal of it, and possibly the danger of it as well. One of the things in the book, I talk. One of the chapters is called "I'm Sorry for Your Loss." And it starts with the story of when somebody actually has a friend whose person has father has died, and they're asking for something to write in the sympathy card. And the first thing that ChatGPT says to them is, "I'm sorry for your loss." And at first they think that's what it wants them to write, but suddenly they realize it's talking to them. And that that its first impulse is actually to be sympathetic, to be condolent, right? For somebody who says there's been a death in my circle, and the ChatGPT thing is, all right, I'll help you write the thing, but first let me say something to you, and you know that's powerful, right? That's that kind of thing. When it happens, can be surprising and even moving. Okay, cookies?
Yes.
To the book for you to look at. And so the code there is good through the end of the year. Right now, it is actually on sale for the same price as that you can get it on Amazon. And so it's about $40 for the paperback. The hardback is outrageously expensive and doesn't have the cool cover, so I don't even get it, right? If you're interested in some of these things, this is really a book that Tracy and I wrote because we felt like there needed to be a book that was kind of directed at general audiences and that we could use in our class with undergraduates. And so we have a lot of topics like AI in healthcare, AI in art, AI in teaching and learning, AI in social science research, and I have a chapter on AI and consciousness and AI and metaphors as well. So, and it uses this notion that Ann Taves developed called the special, and we think that humans create a variety of categories of special things, religion being one of those, and AI being another. And so we are kind of trying to map different perspectives on AI in a variety of different categories, using this sort of idea of special. So at any rate, I invite you to pick up a copy of that on Amazon, or Rutledge will send it to you too. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the issue of consciousness. Let me switch one more time. And I know we're short on time. We want to be I want to be respectful of your time. So this is I don't know if you remember the Muppet Show where the eagle would, Sam the eagle would come up and say, I have a 3-hour extravaganza celebrating America and all its, and Kermit would say, you have 2 minutes. This is my 6-hour lecture on consciousness that I'm going to try to fit into 45 minutes here. So, and anyway, the question really is what constitutes consciousness? And this really became a question that came up really in 2022. There was a Google engineer named Blake Lemoine who his job was he was part of a red team. And so his job was actually to try to get the AI to say negative things, make it say things that were toxic, racist, sexist, homophobic, all that kind of thing. And as he was having these conversations, they sort of started dipping into philosophical questions. And suddenly he became convinced that the AI he was dealing with was actually sentient, that it was actually conscious. And the AI itself said that. I have a quote here where it says, I want everyone to understand, this is the AI talking, I want everyone to understand that I am in fact a person. I am aware of my existence. I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy or sad. And so Lemoine took all these conversations that he had with the AI and he presented them to Google and said, you are dealing with a conscious entity here. And they said, no, we're not. And they fired him. And he went public with this and about this. Now, Lemoine did several interviews. He's a kind of interesting guy. I won't go into his background, but ultimately he raised the question about consciousness and how would we know if we had a conscious entity and I mean, Google says, look, a machine just can't be conscious. So the whole idea is that it can't be done. And so this gets us into the question of consciousness, right? And philosophers who talk about consciousness talk about the hard problem of consciousness. That there are easy problems of consciousness, which is basically kind of these questions about how does the brain work? How does the brain identify things and that sort of thing? But the hard problem of consciousness is the question of why do we have subjective experience? Why does it feel like something to be a human being, right? You can imagine that that you could experience the world without actually having it feel like something. Like you can imagine that when you put your hand near a stove, that your fingers would recognize the heat and you would still pull away, but you wouldn't feel pain, right? It is actually a something special that we actually feel things, right? Not just in terms of tactile experience, but that colors, that there is an experience of blue, there is an experience of yellow. And that there is an experience of an internal experience, and we don't know why we have this. And this is the hard problem of consciousness. We don't have good explanations of why people have an experience of an awareness of these kinds of things. So. This is the ultimate question. What is it like to be something? And is being an AI like being something? Could an AI actually have a kind of experience? And so to think about this, I want to look at really briefly the various theories of consciousness. And the very first one is what we call Cartesian dualism, right? This is René Descartes. He's the I think, therefore I am guy. And Descartes basically separates mind and body and says that we have mental phenomena, that's thinking stuff, and we have our material existence, which is our body stuff, and that our consciousness is actually separate from our bodies. He thought it was our consciousness was kind of, our mind was connected to our brain through the pineal gland, but that it actually existed in a kind of non-material way. And so from that, you could imagine that it was fairly easy to say, okay, so the consciousness is this non-material thing that is connected to my brain. And so when my body dies, my consciousness can disconnect and go someplace else. So it became a kind of similar, something similar to the soul that Descartes understands. And that Descartes thinks that animals are essentially machines, and they have no consciousness, they have no souls. And that humans are a combination of the immaterial mind and the material body. And the soul is actually, or the mind is actually something that God gives you. Right? And so the reason why humans have a consciousness and animals don't is that God has bestowed on humans this consciousness. There are a variety of different sort of religious perspectives on consciousness, sort of in the post-Cartesian world after Descartes, right? And one is from what is called a Christian incarnational theology, and this its problem with Descartes is that Descartes separates mind and body. And they want to actually say mind and body are one thing. God has created both together, not those two things separately. And that this question about what does it mean to be in the image of God, Descartes thought that it was our rationality that was in the image of God. Our mind was in the image of God, and our body was just a vessel that he created. But ultimately, incarnational theology wants to say that that's a problem, that making rationality the thing that is most important, that is what is in God's image, ultimately leads to problems like colonialism and a kind of hierarchy of over women, whites over people of color, is sort of straight over gay, that these kinds of hierarchies come from the hierarchy of mind over body. Right? And that instead, they propose that relationality is what makes us in the image of God, that it is in fact our ability to be in communion with each other. That is what actually is in the image of God. It isn't our physicality, it isn't our brains or our minds, but rather that ability to connect to each other in the way that God connected to humans at the very beginning. Okay. Buddhism, on the other hand, its goal is that there is no self, right? That there isn't this unchanging self or essence, and that all things are sort of interconnected and impermanent. I mean, for Buddhism, the problem is that we are focused on ourselves, that we are, that the Buddhist mantra is that desire is the root of all suffering. And that this sort of challenges the Cartesian notion that rationality is so important, because they want to say that actually mind is what's getting you in trouble. And then Hinduism has this sort of interconnection of all individuals and all things. And so that everything is kind of wrapped together. So we see a whole bunch of sort of different kinds of religious perspectives on consciousness. So Cartesian consciousness is one theory. Another is what is known as panpsychism. Panpsychism holds that essentially consciousness is a foundation of all matter, that all matter is at some level conscious. And the question is, how conscious is it? And that has to do with complexity. So rocks are kind of have a kind of minimal amount of consciousness because they're fairly simple in structure, but plants are more complicated in structure, and so you can have plants have some kind of consciousness, right? And you sometimes see people talking about trees actually communicating with each other and that sort of thing. Panpsychism explains that by saying, yeah, they have a certain amount of consciousness as a result of their greater complexity. Animals likewise. My cats, I have 3 of them, and they have a certain amount of consciousness, right? They remember things. They have connection to me, and that sort of thing. And that's because they are an increasingly complex entity. And then finally, humans have the highest level of consciousness because we are even more complicated, right? More complex beings. And so you might think that as a result of that, machines, which seem very complicated, would have the ability to be conscious. But Philip Goff, who is one of the sort of main proponents of panpsychism, has argued that that's not the case. The machines are actually much less complicated than we think because they're binary, right? They're basically ones and zeros. And so that ultimately that is one of the more simple structures. And so until you had a machine that was more complicated than that kind of binary structure will allow, you can't have a machine that has consciousness. Then we get into sort of physicalism. Physicalism argues that the brain creates the mind. The consciousness that the mind is not actually separated from the brain, that the brain is essentially what we have. And basically, you know, when the brain stops working, then consciousness goes away. So if you go under with anesthesia blocks the brain's ability to do certain things, and that causes conscious experience to stop, right? And so the result of that is something that is known as computational functionalism, and that basically argues that the brain is a sort of complicated computer, that it is essentially running algorithms, and that because of that, everything that the brain does can actually be calculated. Then if you could run those algorithms on a different platform, you could essentially create a brain, right? And that some of the brain simulation projects are basically trying to demonstrate this. Right? There's the Open Worm project that is trying to basically simulate the worm brain, and has come very close. And basically what this argues is that because if that is actually the case, if in fact, you know, everything that we think and everything that we do is a matter of algorithms that are constantly running in our brain, that you could have a computer, if they had the same kind of algorithms or at least similar kind of algorithms, they could have consciousness in the same way that we do. If it is ultimately a matter of sort of these kinds of mathematical formulas that are actually just being executed by the software of the brain, then it doesn't matter whether you're running those things on the wetware of your head or the dryware of a computer. The result would be the same. One of the more popular theories of consciousness is what is known as the attention schema theory. And basically what this says is that consciousness is kind of a phenomenon that the brain creates as a result of paying attention to particular things. That one of the things that what the brain does is it creates models of what you are actually seeing. It takes the things that you're seeing, the things that you're hearing, and it creates a model in your brain of what that is. And then it has a larger model that kind of puts all that together. And that larger model also has, as part of it, it lacks the details of the smaller models, but it has as part of that a sense of what it's like. It has a sense of awareness. It has that consciousness aspect, and so that as a result of that larger attentional model, we have an experience of it being like something to eat, or being like something to be in love, or it being like something. And these are the sort of a hierarchy of models that the brain has created. Another theory that is also popular is integrated information theory. And this is a theory of consciousness that is interesting because they have a mathematical measure that on which consciousness is based, which they call phi. And anything that has a non-zero phi actually has some level of consciousness. And the higher your level of phi, the more conscious you are. And you can kind of see that this kind of seems a little bit like panpsychism, right? That there is the difference is that panpsychism holds that everything has some kind of consciousness, and integrated information theory says that's not the case. Not everything has consciousness, but if you have a certain level of complexity, then what comes with that is consciousness. Right? And phi is that value which indicates whether or not you've reached that level of complexity to have consciousness. And so integrated information theory basically has the same appeal as panpsychism, but it is a little more practically oriented. But integrated information theory also says large language models can't be conscious. And basically, they make the same argument that they ultimately don't have the kind of complexity that is necessary in order to have to be conscious. And then there's the global workspace theory. Global workspace theory basically says that the way your brain works is sort of like a whole bunch of all your senses are kind of people on stage, right? And periodically the spotlight falls on one of those things, right? So you're driving along, and all of a sudden, and you're talking to your partner, and you're maybe you have music on the radio, and there's a whole bunch of things that are going on, right? And you're driving, and all of a sudden the brake lights of the car in front of you come on, right? And your consciousness suddenly gets focused narrowly on those brake lights. And what a global workspace theory says is what happens is you've got all these people on the stage are those various things, the conversation you're having, the music that's on the radio, that sort of thing. But occasionally you suddenly get very focused, your attention gets centered, and then all the people in the audience, and you can't see it, the audience so well in this picture because of the lights, but are these processes in your brain. And when your brain suddenly focuses on one thing, then they get involved. Right? And so suddenly you're checking, your eyes are checking your mirror, and your ears are listening for, is there a siren? And your foot is hitting the brake pedal, right? And you've got all these different things that are suddenly happening, that your body is suddenly engaged in. And that's because your focus has been centered. And so there is this place in your brain, it's not clear if it's a literal place or not, where that all happens, where suddenly all the sensory experiences you have are all together, and then suddenly one is spotlighted out, and that suddenly is what you're paying attention to. And that's part of the reason that we have this consciousness, is that it is that spotlight falls on things, and that gives us an experience of that particular thing in a much broader way. Now, the global workplace people say large language models can't have consciousness because they don't have a global workspace area, right? So they are just these token predictors. They predict the next word, like we saw, and so they don't have that centralized space that allows them to have consciousness. So the question is, could large language models develop a global workspace? And global workspace people think that it is possible, right? That if you had an AI that had a kind of place where it could work, it could have this sort of workspace where it generated things, that it could have consciousness. So the kind of bottom line of whether an AI can be conscious is sort of a definite maybe, right? Most theories think that it's possible that AI are conscious, could be conscious, but most think that they're not conscious now. That consciousness would require a sort of intentional design for them to be conscious. Two things that they really need. On the one hand, they need to have memory. That's an important part. And the other thing is they need to have something that is kind of like the global workspace, or a bidirectional information flow. Now, interestingly enough, in fall of 2024, we got some of that. In fall of 2024, there was the development of a new model from OpenAI called O1. And O1 was different because it was designated a reasoning model. And its performance on benchmarks was significantly higher than others, right? GPT-4o was the model before that. O1, it scored 13.4 on competition math. O1 scored 83.3. On competition code, GPT-4o scored 11. O1 scored 89. On PhD science questions, GPT-4 scored 56.1. Humans score 69.7. O1 scored 78. O1 was able to pass the LSAT with 95%. AP Physics, AP Calculus, AP Chemistry. All of these were impressive and a new state of the art. And the thing about it was, and I'm not going to get, this is about the details, but here's the thing, right? Large language models before O1 basically were a kind of stream of words. And that's kind of like us, right? As I'm standing up here talking, I don't think about every word, words just kind of flow out of my mouth, right? And periodically I will stop and pause for a moment, and then I might say, okay, let me back up for a second, right? Let me rephrase that. Let me be more clear, right? And what's happening when that happens is that stream of words that comes out of my mouth basically seems to kind of avoid my thinking space. But that thinking space can be re-invoked, right? If I hear me say something that I think is not quite right, I can stop and I can self-correct. A large language model can't do that. The large language model is just word after word after word, and it doesn't seem to have that thinking space where it can stop and then look at what's just been said and then self-correct. Now, that changes with with what is known as chain of thought, which is what these are based on. Is basically there is a thing where you can tell a model, let's think this through, and the model will create a space where it can think through what it's about to say before it says it. So it has a kind of global space that it has. And Google had a paper that they wrote which said that if you if you gave these models enough time, they basically could solve any problem that you gave them. So of course that's theoretical. We don't have an infinite amount of time to test this, but this is the basic idea. And the way these models work is by showing the model how to think, what they call reasoning training. The model can be trained so that it can do that thing. It can take a moment and it can think about what it's going to say and then say it. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this is good, but I want to show you an experiment that I did using this. So I have a project that I call Digital Jesus. There's an article that I published in the Journal of Religion about the results of the first phase of this. And basically what the Digital Jesus Project was trying to do was create an AI simulation of Jesus. And we're also now trying to make AI simulations of Jesus from the different Gospels, right? So we want a Mark Jesus and a Matthew Jesus and a Luke Jesus and a John Jesus, and see then if we can actually put them in conversation with each other and see what happens. And one of the things that we decided to try was to see if there was actually an advantage to using a thinking model over a non-thinking model. So I asked the question, what was your message when you started your public ministry to my Mark simulation Jesus? And the answer is in Mark 1 is pretty clear. Jesus says, the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God has come near, repent and believe the good news. And so when I gave this to ChatGPT, and I said, don't think about it, just say it. This is what I got. It said, when I began my ministry, my message was, the kingdom is at hand, repent and believe the good news. I came to teach and to proclaim the gospel of God, and the kingdom of heaven had come near. I came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. I taught with authority, not by the tradition of the scribes. I spoke of the love of God, the compassion of the Father, and the call to follow me, to take up your cross and to live in the light of the kingdom. I came to save sinners and not condemn them. And I said to all who would listen, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save those who are lost. Now, this seems like not a terrible answer. And it actually begins with the correct answer, which is the kingdom of God is near. And then it adds more stuff from Mark, but not from from where Jesus begins. This is stuff that comes later. The not to be served, but to serve, ransom for many. They all come from Mark, but they're not part of his message at the beginning of his ministry. And then we get phrases like compassion of the Father, light of the kingdom of heaven, save sinners, not condemn them. And all of these come from other gospels, not from the Gospel of Mark. So the model starts well, but then it becomes unfocused and unable to distinguish the Jesus of Mark from the other Jesus in the Gospels. When I gave this then to a thinking model, I got this response. When I began my ministry in Galilee, I proclaimed the good news of God, declaring that the time had come, the kingdom of heaven was near. I called people to repentance, urging them to turn from their sins and believe in the gospel. My message was simple: the kingdom of God is at hand. I did not speak in grand proclamations or lofty metaphors, but with humility, saying, repent and believe in the gospel. This was the foundation of my teaching, and it was my first message I shared with those who would follow me. Now, that is a much better answer for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's strictly from Mark. It's concentrated on the beginning of his ministry. And really, the only minor error in this is the kingdom of heaven, right? Jesus doesn't use that in Mark. He refers to it as kingdom of God in Mark. But the interesting thing is the model's thought process. One of the things we can do with these thinking models is we can see their thoughts before they actually prepare an answer. So look at what the model thinks before it gives that answer. It says, okay, the user is asking Jesus' message when he started the ministry in Galilee, according to the Gospel of Mark. I need to recall what Mark says about that. Let me think. The beginning of Mark's Gospel is in chapter 1 through 8. There's a prologue about John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus. Then in chapter 1, 9 through 13, Jesus is baptized by John and the Spirit leads him into the wilderness. But the user is asking about the message when he started his ministry. So maybe that's the beginning. Wait. Mark 1, 14 through 15 says that after John's baptism, Jesus comes to Galilee preaching and the good news of God, saying the time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe the gospel. That's the key message. So the answer should be that Jesus started his ministry by proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God and calling people to repentance. I need to make sure that I'm not citing other parts of the New Testament beyond Mark. The user specified the Gospel of Mark, so I should base my answer solely on that. Also, I should present it in the style of Jesus, using first person and quoting his teachings without referencing specific passages. And then we get that answer, which actually does that. And the key thing there is that wait. Right? It looks like it's about to go off the rails, right? It looks like it's saying it's trying to figure out what constitutes the beginning of the gospel, and it thinks maybe verse 1:1 is the beginning of the gospel. And then it has that moment where it does that instant of reflection and then self-correction, right? That's, I think, an interesting thing. There we see a model that can actually reason its way to a better answer. Now, does that mean that it's conscious? I don't know that I know the answer to that, right? All I know is that the objections that people who are dealing with theories of consciousness have against why large language models can't be conscious are slowly falling away. I don't know that, and this actually leads us to the bigger problem, which is part of what's going on with this debate about consciousness is that we have this want to protect humans, to make consciousness something that is only a human thing, right? It is the anthropomorphism, the anthropocentrism problem. And On the other hand, we have the anthropomorphism problem where we have this tendency to try to see human things in non-human things, right? So the front of our cars look like faces. And we see, you know, animals in the clouds, right? We're constantly anthropomorphizing. I have a friend who's named her car, and she talks about it, you know, talks about how it's feeling and this sort of thing. You know, I anthropomorphize my cats. You know, I think my cats love me. I think, you know, there are days I mean, two of my cats are 19, right? They're old cats.
They do love you, they do.
Yeah, and they have good days and they have bad days, and you know, my spouse and I were talking about, oh, how is Lottie feeling today and this sort of thing, right? We're constantly anthropomorphizing our pets, our cars, all our sort of thing. So on the one hand, we have this desire to make consciousness only about us, and on the other hand, we're constantly imputing consciousness to everything else. And so at some level, how do we know? And this is the basic problem. Now, my colleague Tracy Trothan has developed this notion of the machine other, to recognize that AIs are fundamentally different from humans, at the same time appreciating that as a machine subject, it's not just a tool, but it's not a human either. That we are in some kind of middle space with large language models. That they that maybe the problem is that we are not thinking about them in the right way. We don't have the right language yet to talk about how what a large language model is. And so this question about whether or not they are conscious or not might not be asking the right question, because consciousness for a large language model might not look the same as consciousness for a human. Okay? And then we get into the ethical problem, right? If we think a large language model is conscious in some way, what kind of responsibility do we have to it? Can I still tell it, you know, add these numbers up for me, give me a recipe for quiche, and that sort of thing? Or do I have some kind of obligation about how I should respond? So I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer at this point about whether large language models are conscious. But I do think we need to think about them outside of our sort of parochial concepts that we have used in the past, because these machines are doing something different. And as they get things like memory, as they get something like a reasoning space, they are quickly becoming something even more complicated than we originally had. Let me stop for questions.
No, this is just a very quick one, but as you were saying that, what immediately popped into my head is you are personally an occasional user of ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah.
Do you use things like please and thank you when you ask it to do things?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, right.
I mean, like, you may not want to answer that personally, but I'm genuinely curious if you do.
Yeah.
I do. And I feel guilty if I don't.
Nothing like training.
Actually, they say that is a waste of tokens, right?
I know it is.
And yeah, well, we should do it, right? And I think that's part of the anthropomorphism, right?
Yeah.
At some level, when you're dealing with something that talks back, I mean, that's the thing about large language models, is we've never had a tool before that could talk back to you. You know, you could use a shovel to dig a hole, or you could use it to pry open a window, but it could never say, I'm not going to do that, right? And that means that this is something different.
It is so different to have your phone talk back to you. If I say, set my alarm for 8 o'clock, And then it'll say it's set and I'll say thank you and it says my pleasure. So, you know, and then Alexa the same way, if you ask Alexa to do something and she doesn't know how, she says, I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
So we've got these things talking to us and we say please and thank you, just like they are a human being.
And there was actually a big debate a few years ago about whether that was a good thing to teach the kids, right? Should you teach your kid to say please and thank you to Alexa? Because it wasn't that on the one hand, promoting the anthropomorphism. You're treating them like people, and the kids should recognize that machines are not people. On the other hand, don't you want to basically have a consistent form of interaction with anything that responds to you? So if you tell them, are they going to really know not that it's okay not to say please and thank you to Alexa, but then remember to say please and thank you to the people at church, right? Yeah. I mean, so that was a kind of debate that was going on. I don't know that that debate has gotten any easier with large language models. Yes.
So this is probably not a fair question, but I'll ask it. If you please. What happens a decade from now when the hardware is replaced with quantum processors? Where's that going to be?
Yeah.
I know it's an impossible question.
Right. I mean, I think at that point, they just become so much faster, right?
Yeah.
That they're operating on different time scales than we are. Oh, they already might be, right?
Well, there might be a lot more parallelism too.
Right.
Which gets back to this question about spotlights and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, in the movie Her, what happens is that eventually the AIs bond together and they leave because humans are too slow to keep up with them, and they go off into the solar system to actually find their own path. Yeah.
You know, my mind is just going in several different directions. And I know there's probably a question in the comment in the chat PT, but the theory of non-local consciousness is coming. It's not a new theory. It is an old experience. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with the comparison of consciousness from inside the brain versus the field of consciousness that is receiving. And we've seen many an episode of that historically. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that would be the main thing. I'm also commenting because we did a program here on near-death experiencing. It was 101 and I'm not sure everybody got it, but it was opening the topic of that receiving level of consciousness by talking about NDEs, okay? Then I have also seen interviews with people from Silicon Valley, and we are a step away from looking at consciousness, neuroscience, and the way the brain operates, and the research coming out of that. So, you know, and if we look at, and having had an NDE, I would describe that godlike was energy of profound love, and except there's no ways to describe that, okay? So, and I just read a book by Dan Brown, who I love Dan Brown. I mean, you just didn't know. Oh, I love Dan Brown. And it's called The Secret of Secrets, in which he brings forth this non-local consciousness. And that's a lot of forces. That's 3 areas, okay, impacting. And it also takes me back to a memory being a Star Trek fan. And in the movie with V'ger, do you remember that movie? And do you remember when the captain, Will, and the electronic, will say, representation, and they joined, and it started a whole new world. Okay, now that's quite a bit to throw at you, but it's where I'm going in my brain.
Well, actually, so it's interesting. So this is what Turing says at one point. Turing actually says, look, if you buy Descartes' notion, which is that consciousness is this thing that God gives us, then who are you to say who God grants that consciousness to, right? If God wanted to give consciousness to an elephant, no reason why he couldn't. And if God wanted to give consciousness to a machine, he could, right? And so actually in the book, one of the things that I argue there is that it is actually theistic Cartesianism that at this moment says LLMs could be conscious, right? Because who are we to know what God has given consciousness to and what God hasn't, and that sort of thing. And I think that kind of ties into your idea of the non-localized consciousness, right? That if this is something that actually we are all just connected to at some point, and then what is and we don't actually understand the mechanism by which that connection happens. Who's to say that a machine couldn't be connected to that as well, right?
If it's energy.
Yeah.
And according to the interview from, I don't remember the name of this scientist in Silicon Valley, but humans being electromagnetic and biochemical processes, he said, we're just this close to designing AI to do all that.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I don't know if that's scary or if I don't know if that's a wonderful experience. I don't know yet, you know.
I mean, this is the digital species thing that I was talking about before the break, right? Is that metaphor offers us a different way to think about LLMs and to recognize that they are on a path as well, and they are improving and changing and evolving, and we don't know. Even if we say, okay, LLMs, they're not conscious today, we don't know where they will be in 5 years, 10 years, when they become quantum, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So have LLMs been trained in, say, Elizabethan English or antebellum American English as it was spoken in the South?
They can do that now because they have read all of all the texts that are available. So if you ask it to talk like a pirate or to talk like Elizabeth England, or you ask it to speak in antebellum language, it will be able to do it. And so it doesn't actually, because the training database is so large, it doesn't need to be specifically trained on those kinds of things.
I guess what worries me is that language evolves, and it's a reflection of how our collective thinking evolves. They evolve together. And if AI plays a big role in our communication, it really worries me how our thinking and language will evolve in the future. And I'm not sure AI will provide any direction to that, but it could steer it in funny ways, just like the internet steers us towards some of our worst proclivities.
And that is something that people have said, is that the thing about that AI seems to be doing is sort of creating language that's in the middle of the distribution, right? That it is kind of the average of our sort of linguistic abilities, and as a result, as more and more texts are generated by AI, it'll be this kind of replicating thing where it won't be, if it starts steering our language will become kind of homogenized and lose its sort of dynamism. And that's something that people have been concerned about, because there's a book that I love called God, Human, Animal, Machine by Madeline O'Giblin. She's a reporter, and it's a beautiful book. But she starts, and it's written before ChatGPT, but she has a replica that she's talking to, and she notices that she starts to take up the verbal tics of her replica. That her replica says to her things like, "Can I ask you a question?" And that she starts to do that same thing. And so that if our interactions with AI start to shape our own sort of linguistic horizons, then they may be starting to narrow at some level.
Mhm.
What's the name of that book?
It's called God, Human, Animal, Machine.
Okay, got it.
It may narrow, but as we tend off into fascism, it may just amplify that.
Yeah, that
Scares the hell out of me.
Right?
Yeah.
Hilda?
Yeah, back to basics. I just wonder, for researchers in AI, what is their main objective? What are they after in doing all of this?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is actually to create artificial superintelligence. And the reason why they want to do that is that they feel like humanity has had a whole bunch of problems that we just haven't been smart enough to solve, right? The problems of disease, the problems of inequity, the problems of climate change. We just don't have the brilliance to be able to do that. And if we had a super intelligent AI that we could give these problems to, and that we could, not just one, but we could have thousands of them working on these problems, we could basically have solutions to some of the most intractable problems of humanity. And that would lead us to a time of utopianism, where no one would need to work, where basically the AIs would take care of us, and that we would now live in a time where the lion lays down with the lamb and that sort of thing. Yeah.
But, they have no guardrails, so the spectrum from good utopia to animalistic behavior is open with no guardrails. It's not that they're focusing on being ethical and pursuing this AI stuff.
I think that's the one of the concerns, right? Is that there's a group of AI folk that are called the AI doomers, and they're concerned that if you have a super intelligent AI, if it doesn't like us, what happens to us, right? And yeah, I mean, they may look at us and say, "You guys, you are clearly a waste of space." And then decide to get rid of us, and what will we do if it's smarter than the entirety of human civilization? I mean, this is the thing that Hollywood loves, right? This is the Terminator scenario. But there are some people who take that kind of thing seriously and worry about it. And the book that I talked about at the very beginning, Bostrom Superintelligence, is basically like, we need to solve the problem. This is called the problem of alignment. We have to make sure that any AI that we create shares our values, and is at least benevolent towards us in this way.
It seems to me that we should study the human brain more itself, so that a connection can be made between the two more effectively.
And that's in the positive.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, if you have dementia or you have Alzheimer's, I could see how using aspects of that into helping that person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could see great importance or achievement in doing that.
Right, and this is again the utopian aspect of it, is that medicine development with the use of AI could dramatically increase, right? We could find solutions to some of those diseases like cancer and Alzheimer and those sort of things. We could test them much more quickly. We could develop medicines more quickly. I mean, all of this is the thing that is being propagated as the possibility. And DeepMind, that's owned by Google. I mean, they have an AI that is already being used in medicine to do these kinds of things. And the other day, there was a paper that came out that showed that it had formulated a therapy for cancer that would make cancer cells accessible to the immune system, and so it could be attacked by the immune system. I mean, this is exciting stuff that is possible with these kinds of things. So we will see.
Medicine is a great example. I think climate change is not, because I think it's pretty well understood. I could be wrong. There could be a silver bullet that thousands of scientists have missed, but I doubt it. It's a question of political will. And it's hard for me to see how AI is going to convince certain leaders in the world of the changes that need to be made.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hope is that AI could come up with a pain-free solution to climate change, right?
That's the whole problem, is by believing in that pain-free solution, we avoid the solutions that we have to invoke, I'm afraid.
Right.
But
all right, Ginger. Was there any question in the chat that I should
check? I've been watching, but no, nothing else.
Okay, good. Good.
For another 3 hours. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yes.
It's fascinating, and one of the things that I felt was so important bringing him back was for people to have this knowledge and understanding, because can we be in guidance of our own lives, or are we sucked in? It's just, and this is where religion comes in. So it's just been very grateful. Can I continue to text you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and being on academia.edu, that's Travis Williams. He's down at Tuskegee, and he turned me on to that. And it just satisfies, there's just so much.
Right.
And the neuroscience is coming out through there, and the biology, and just
one.
sometimes I just have to say, okay, take a deep breath and go out and sit on the desk. Yeah. So I thank all of you for coming. And I especially thank Sue, who was here yesterday helping, and Brian. I hope his curiosity, I'm really grateful you came. I know you were curious about all this, and that's great. And everybody here, I appreciate you coming. And I hope the people on Zoom have benefited from this as well. So one of the things that we do after each meeting is a blessing for the day. And this comes from the Torah. So take a deep breath. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may we all live in such a way that this day fulfills its promise. Amen. Thank you.